Okay, is everybody ready to go?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I would like to welcome us to the November 10th meeting of the Jefferson County Board of Education. And the first order of business for us tonight is to go into an executive session. The board will now conduct a closed session as permitted by KRS 61.8101C and KRS 61.8101K of the Open Meetings Act for the purpose of discussions relating to pending litigation and formative discussions of the superintendent's professional growth plan. Is there at this time a motion for the executive session, please?
So moved. James Craig.
Okay, I heard Mr. Marshall first, I think, and then James Craig. Is that correct?
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me call for the vote quickly. Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall?
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Dr. Chris?
Yes.
Thank you. Diane Porter? Yes, it's unanimous. So we are now adjourned to go into the executive session. Hopefully I'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you. The Board of Education met in executive session as permitted by KRS 61.8101K of the Open Meetings Act for the purpose of formative discussions relating to the superintendent's professional growth plan. The board also discussed pending litigation as permitted by KRS 61.8101C. Public discussion of this matter and identification of the specific matter would disclose litigation strategy and have an adverse impact upon the legal and financial interest of the district. No action was taken while in closed session. I will now entertain a motion to authorize board counsel to effectuate a settlement in the matter identified in closed session and pursuant to the terms discussed in the closed session. At this time, is there a motion, please?
Craig moves.
Thank you, Board Member Craig. Is it seconded by?
Marshall.
Thank you, Board Member Marshall. For this, I will have to call for the vote, please. And starting with Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. Diane Porter. Yes. So it's unanimous for that. And because we were in a 6 o'clock meeting, we now have to motion to adjourn the 6 o'clock meeting before we can officially start the 7 o'clock meeting. So is there a motion that the Board of Education adjourn from the 6 p.m. meeting?
Marshall.
Thank you, Board Member Marshall. Seconded by?
Show.
Okay,
Schul.
Dr. Schul, thank you. And I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands because it's too many people on there for me to see. So, Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall, Board Member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. Diane Porter. Yes. So we are officially adjourned from the 6 p.m. and we now will start our work sessions. So at this time, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the November 10th meeting of the Jefferson County Board of Education and thank everyone for being here this evening. Before I ask for a recommendation of the approval of the meeting agenda, I would like to congratulate some of our board members who have been reelected to office, starting with Dr. Chris Cobb, District 2, Board Member Joe Marshall, District 4, and our newest board member that we will see in January, but not at the current time, is Sarah McIntosh for District 7. I have asked her to join us briefly at our December meeting so she can say hello also virtually. Get used to that. And at that next meeting, I will give everybody a total of 2 minutes. If you have any new thoughts, congratulations to our re-elected board members, and thank you for your service. Moving on, is there a recommendation for the approval of the meeting agenda?
Craig moves.
Okay, Board Member Craig, thank you. And is there a second?
Marshall.
Thank you, sir. Calling for the vote again, starting with Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Chris.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. And Diane Porter, yes. I forgot to say that Board Member Duncan is unable to be with us tonight. So we will move on now for the recommendation for approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the October 27th special meeting, please?
Marshall.
Thank you, Board Member Marshall, seconded by,
Craig.
thank you, Board Member Craig. Calling for the vote, Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. Diane Porter. Yes, it's unanimous. At this time, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce to you our superintendent, Dr. Marty Polio, for the superintendent's report. Dr. Polio.
Yes, thank you, Chair Porter and board members. I bring you the superintendent report for November 10th, 2020. And I would like to echo your congratulations, Chair Porter, to Chris Cobb and Joe Marshall. So happy you are staying on the team with us. Got a lot of unfinished business to do, so congratulations. I'm looking forward to continuing our work together. And I also want to recognize Sarah Cole McIntosh, who I've spoken with, and excited to have her on the team as well. And I think, once again, we have a great team doing the work moving forward. So congratulations to all. And I know you've probably heard this way too much in my superintendent reports over the past several months. Sound like a broken record, but since this is the first one after the election, I'm going to touch on it briefly one more time, I think. And now we may talk more about it down the road, but one more time specifically about this. And everyone knows on Friday, October 30th, Judge Brian Edwards ruled that the petition against the JCPS tax levy was invalid. And therefore, as a school district, we can levy the 7 cents per $100 of real estate property assessed value. And we know over the journey over this past 6 months has been long and hard and difficult. But it's also been inspiring to me, this journey, just to see the amount of people and the variety of different folks who have endorsed JCPS. And I think seen so many people get behind this desire for the future state, and just to see op-eds from the Courier Journal, from GLI, from Business First, many other groups that have gotten behind us, even WDRB, saying that this is the right way forward, has been inspirational to me. And so, you know, as a district, it's critical that we are transparent in the implementation of the future state and how we spend this additional revenue. And it is a commitment I am very serious about, as you know, as I've talked about in my growth plan over the second part of the year. So as we move forward with implementation, we will be bringing a quarterly report to the board about how we are implementing the future state and how we are spending every single dollar. Cross-divisional teams in JCPS right now are working on these implementation plans, full implementation plans, and our cabinet will be reporting each and every cabinet meeting on progress with the future state and the spending. And I am convinced that this future state will bring us the outcomes that we want for all of our students in this district. We will look back as this as being a pivotal moment in the history of our district, and I want to congratulate our board for taking this step. Also, I wanted to highlight that we currently have virtual showcase of schools taking place right now. It's an event we're sorry that we can't be a part of in person this year. We keep experiencing things we have to change. communications team has done an incredible job ensuring that every school has a virtual tour of their school and programs. Family can see the full schedule on our website and take place in live Facebook Q&A sessions with school administrators. So any families out there can go to our website for more information. As you know, the registration and application window continues through December 16th for families to make their school selection for the 2020-21 school year. So please get involved in those virtual showcase of schools and the virtual tours. They are very impressive by each school. Also this evening, you will hear a report from our external auditors. As you know, last year you charged me to ensure that we had a new team on our external auditor. So Dean Dorton will be making their presentation to you tonight. But I do want to recognize the great work of our finance team led by Cordelia Harden. This team works very hard to ensure compliance and transparency in 155 schools, and they've been recognized publicly for that. And I believe they've gotten better and better each and every year. And you will see that reflected in this report tonight and in the KDE Corrective Action Plan. And I also want to thank our RMAC committee led by James Rose for being a part of this as well, as he is here tonight. And they've been great partners in ensuring that we're doing the right work as we move forward. Finally, I want to thank all of our employees, students, and families, as I always do, for their continued support and hard work during NTI. I know what a challenging task this is for everyone. JCPS Families continues to rise to the occasion to provide great services for our children. We do look forward to returning to in-person school. Our schools are ready. We are ready to go and implement those plans. But I have to say this as I finish up. We need support from this entire community. I watch most of Governor Beshear's comments every single week and Dr. Stack's comments. And as we see the data, we now have no yellow counties in this entire state. And I think we are only down to about 38 orange counties. Every other county in this state is currently red. Right now in Jefferson County this afternoon, we were at 43.2 cases per 100,000. Our local positivity rate is 6.8. And I believe the state positivity rate is now over 7%. So, I plead with everyone, please ensure compliance with CDC guidelines, social distancing, and masking, and not being in group settings over the coming weeks so that we can reduce the spread throughout this city, throughout this community and this state. And that is dependent upon us getting back to school as quickly as possible. When we first presented this plan, our cases per 100,000 have tripled. And so we've got to get those numbers going in the opposite direction so we can get our children back in school. This is something for our whole community to wrap their arms around. Thank you, Chair Porter, and look forward to tonight's reports.
Thank you, Dr. Polio. We're going to move forward with our work sessions for this evening. And the first work session is about the comprehensive annual financial report that ended June the 30th, 2020. So Dr. Polio, if you would like to introduce that, please.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chair Porter. And as I said, we have some members of RMAC with us. We have our external auditors with Dean Dorton, and then some JCPS finance personnel who will also be a part of this discussion. As I said in my introduction, this is a new external auditing group that has done this, and that was charged by our board last year. And so we followed through on that. And so this is the first time that Dean Dorton has had a look at this from an external auditing perspective. So I will introduce our CFO, Cordelia Harden, and I'll allow her to kick it off.
Thank you, Dr. Polio. Tonight we are presenting our audited financial report for the period ended June 30th, 2020. Following best practice and the advice from the board and RMAC, we issued a request for proposal, and our evaluation resulted in the selection of our new auditing firm, Dean Dorton Allen Ford. We are pleased with the work of the audit team, which provided us with recommendations within our document and identified some changes we needed to make. I want to now introduce Jim Tenza and Simon Keemer with Dean Dorton to provide an overview of the audit and their team members.
Thank you, Cordelia. This is Jim Tenza, Director with Dean Dorton. And Simon Keemer is here with me today. So we always have two directors involved in our audits from a quality and client perspective. So he and I are both here today. Just real briefly on our team, since this is our first year doing the audit, some of you may recognize me. I've been involved in providing other services to JCPS over the years, mainly in the internal audit, but I have over 30 years of experience. And then Simon, who really leads the audit of the financial statements. He is our governmental expert, well known throughout the state, and leads a lot of work with governmental agencies. And in our team, we have a whole host of team. We have several staff people, IT auditors. I did want to mention, Megan Crane is manager. She works with almost every college university in the state of Kentucky and has a lot of experience with grant auditing and single audit requirements. Phil Blakely helped lead the work with the school activity fund audits and has a lot of experience with Red Book compliance, including work at JCPS as well at Fayette County Public Schools. And then Tori Montgomery really led a lot of the financial statement audit work. And she has done at least a half dozen school district audits throughout the state of Kentucky, different school districts. So she has a lot of experience that she brought. As far as just the overall, just a couple comments just on the overall audit, we are substantially complete. We did meet with RMAC to go through all of our audit results in a lot of detail. So what we're going to present here today is just very high level. But the big picture is there's no major problems, no major findings. Management and the finance committee was outstanding to work with, very diligent on and focused on getting everything right and completed in a timely manner. We were very impressed with their experience and expertise. And as far as the audit, besides just us doing the audit for the first time, the only other unusual item was dealing with doing the audit during this COVID coronavirus pandemic. We did do everything remotely. And again, management was great with setting that up. We were able to remotely go into the system, go into Munis, go into EPS, and pull a lot of the information that we needed. That worked very well. There were some difficulties with the school Red Book audits because the school, a lot of that is hard copy, so the bookkeepers needed to scan and send some of that information in. But again, just I want to compliment management. So Simon will now touch on some of the more details with the audit.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Simon Keemer. So I headed up primarily the audit of the financial statements and the single audit. With regards to the financial statements, we performed our audit in accordance with three sets of standards: the general US generally accepted auditing standards, governmental auditing standards, and also Kentucky Public School District's audit contract and requirements. So our audits were performed in accordance with those three sets of standards, and we are going to issue an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, but we do have an emphasis of matters section of our auditor's report. The emphasis of matter items are related to the correction of errors related to bond discounts and premiums in accordance with GASB 65, and the contributions to the KTRS Medical Insurance Fund under GASB 75. The emphasis of a matter paragraphs also includes the fact that the district adopted GASB 84 in the current year, which resulted in the school activity funds being moved from fiduciary activities into special revenue funds within the governmental funds. In terms of the single audit, we performed the single audit in accordance with those audit regulations and also in accordance with the uniform guidance. In essence, our single audit covered two major programs, Title I and Title IV, and there were no findings noted as a result of that audit.
As far as the school activity fund audits, there's actually 3 separate sets of financial statements and audits, one for the school activity funds at the elementary schools, one for the middle schools, and one for the high school activity funds. And all of those are going to be clean, unmodified opinions. There were no, well, our approach is a little bit different than the other auditors. I just wanted to point out that we, as part of our audit covered all of the schools, and we did auditing of all schools, but we went deeper into the Red Book compliance requirements for a sample of the schools. So there were 34 schools that we did a much deeper audit work as far as Red Book compliance. And we picked those schools based on a risk assessment, and mainly those that maybe had findings in prior years or had new bookkeepers or principals. So that approach was a little bit different than in the past. From our audit work, there were no findings of any significance. So no material weaknesses, no real significant issues. We did have some minor findings on the school activity fund audits, and those were minor and much less than in the prior years. We had less than half findings as we had in the prior year. And I do want to, before I talk about the material weaknesses, significant deficiencies, I do want to point out that we were very impressed with the improvements that were made with the Red Book compliance and with the school activity funds. From meeting with the bookkeepers, it was clear that they'd gotten some great training and were very experienced and very knowledgeable on what they needed to do. And internal audit also put in a monthly monitoring process where they were looking at things throughout the year. So all of that led to a really good audit of the school activity funds. And as I was saying on the findings, whenever we have control deficiencies, we classify them, and there's basically 3 classifications. The highest, most serious classification is called a material weakness, and there were none. So no material weaknesses in any of the audit work that we did at the school level, at the financial statement level, or the single audit level. So no material weaknesses. A level below that is called a significant deficiency. And so significant deficiency is less severe than a material weakness, but it's important enough that we need to bring it to the attention of the board. And so we had 1 significant deficiency, and that related to the errors that Simon had mentioned related to adopting new accounting standards in previous years, namely GASB 64 and 75. And so to have no material weaknesses and only 1 significant deficiency in the size organization you are, we think is a very good thing. I think that summarizes our audit.
All right, our next slide, we're going to present an overview of the financial results. This information is from the government funds on page 16 of the financial report. At the arrow, I want to bring to your attention the general fund balance, a total of $94.6 million, which has several components. In particular, I want to address committed, that is $36 million. And by board action, several years ago, you committed the 2% state required reserve and additional reserves needed for cash flow due to our main reliance upon local property taxes. Then there is the assigned, which is $32.7 million, and those are encumbrances. These are purchase orders issued as of June 30th, but not paid as of June 30th. Then we look at the unassigned. That's $22.6 million. These are funds available for those rainy days. Emergencies, which we consider COVID-19 has been one of those emergencies that occurred, and for cash flows. With a biweekly payroll of approximately $40 million, these balances are not enough to manage our cash flow needs in the summer until property taxes are received in November. We submitted a substantial reimbursement request through FEMA. However, after attending a FEMA webinar actually today, We're waiting to see if any significant amount of the funding will qualify for reimbursement. We will, however, be submitting reimbursement of the cost which incurred due to COVID-19 through the CARES funding, which will assist with additional expenses that we've incurred so far and will incur in the future. We also await possible support of the nutrition service operations through the feds. We hope that there is additional support there. Our financial results for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020 was a net decrease to fund balance of $37.1 million. This is expenses exceeding the revenue. A recap of the overall audit results is on the next slide. We will again this year be submitting our financials. Dean Dorton provided an unmodified opinion of the audit, which is the highest opinion a firm can give. They had several suggestions for our report, which we included in the version being presented this evening. We also received input from RMAC, the Audit Risk Management Advisory Committee, of which James Rose is the chair. One of their concerns was our audit timelines. When setting our audit schedules and target dates for next year, we're going to strive to improve upon that schedule, giving you, the board, and RMAC more time to review the document. With a district this size and the volume of transactions and documents to be prepared after the close of the year, the audit schedule is very tight. Just like every operation, we had our challenges this year, and Jim mentioned those. The audit certainly had its challenges, a new audit firm and new procedures due to COVID. However, we believe, and from what you've heard from the audit firm this evening, it was a good audit, and we look forward to working with Dean Dorton firm next year. Before ending, I want to thank Eddie Munns and the accounting staff for all of their work in preparing this comprehensive financial report. As I said, we will again this year be submitting the report to the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, with the expectation to receive for the 14th year the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting. This concludes our presentation, and we're available for questions.
Thank you, CFO Harden, very much. From the board members, are there specific questions at this time? Mr. Brady, questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. CFO Harden, I'm curious, you talked about the FEMA reimbursement that you had a meeting with today. Is that, are we still on track with, or thinking we will be reimbursed with the funds that that were discussed with each individual board member when discussing this audit earlier last week?
I believe most of our reimbursement is going to come from CARES. Now, that is based on the webinar that Eddie Munns and I attended today. From what FEMA representative, and the one holding the meeting was the Kentucky Emergency Management. They are the Kentucky representatives for FEMA. And from what they told us, really the only reimbursements would be if you are legally required to provide protective equipment, or if you are legally required to have sanitation because of public emergency. And they said schools did not qualify for that. So they have another seminar, and it's a repeat of what we heard today. I intend to attend that one next week also. There were no questions presented to the Kentucky Management Group. I have a feeling a lot of that was because all of us finance officers were in shock and because it's not what we had been told previously. So I'm expecting some changes. I certainly hope there are some changes, and possibly with this new administration coming in, then they will recognize the need of public schools. And so we'll just have to wait and see. One of the recommendations or directives that they gave us was we should request our reimbursements first from our CARES funding, then submit to FEMA. Now, Eddie and his team, we have already submitted over $12 million to FEMA. What we will do is now submit those eligible expenses to CARES first in order to get those revenues back into the district. But whatever we're able to do with FEMA, we will follow up and do.
All right, I appreciate that, and fingers crossed that a new administration will bring a lot more positive stuff to school districts across the country. I do want to express my thanks to Jim Tenza at Dean Dorton, and also CFO Harden, and everyone else involved, from James Rose and on down up Armac and Jody Wren. I just want to make just express their thanks for this. I know that having a new audit company come in and start this process was something that I've been pushing for a number of years. I know that board member Craig had also been pushing for that as well. It's a best practice. KSBA tells us that's a best practice for businesses. It's a best practice to have a new set of eyes take a look at your financials. And I just want to, just to say this out to the public that this is an example of us doing the right thing, and you're seeing as this organization being as transparent as possible, because we are doing the most responsible thing with having a different firm come in and do our audits. And our books are open. Sometimes we get criticized. They think that there's, we have closed books. The opposite is true. We're about as transparent as possible. And I just want to, send a shout out to one of my other colleagues in another district. I know Tyler Murphy over in Fayette County has been pushing for this process. This is a really good example of what you can see when you do it and you follow through with it. And you see that there's even more sunlight. And with the exception of the GASB standard, which is really more of a difference of opinion between two audit firms, you found that we have yet another unmodified opinion. So thank you for everyone for the hard work and for taking this task on, especially during a pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Are there any other questions from board members? Any other questions? Board member Craig.
Thank you, ma'am. And echoing most of Mr. Brady's comments, I appreciate the work. The no finding audit is generally a gold star or an A+ for the superintendent and his leadership team. So kudos to you, and thank you to Dean Dorton for being on the team. Appreciate the fresh set of eyes. Ms. Harden, I'm quite anxious about the $37 million figure. When will we have more information? When will the board need to start, really assessing what to do if there isn't clear, notification from the feds, if there isn't clear guidance somewhere that, help us on the way, help me with a time frame to orient my thinking for the next several months, because I think I'll be thinking about that every day.
We actually have already started a process. We're in the process of working on the budget for 21-22. Dr. Polio has been clear to Cabinet that we need to start looking at programs, what we are doing. We need to figure out what is working, what is not. And so we understand that funds are limited as far as even on the federal side. So we're hoping that they come through on some of the extenuating circumstances that all districts have been dealing with, but we're not counting on that. We've got the CARES funding and we appreciate everything that has been given to us at this point. But we also need to start looking at our budgets, our expenditures, our revenues. From what I've seen so far this year on the occupational side, it looks like for Louisville, the occupational is getting pretty good results, net profits on corporate net profits as well as wages. So there is some good things happening, I think, in our community. So we've got to get those revenues and expenses back in line. But again, until we get kids back in school safely and things come back to the so-called normal, we just have to continue to work hard to make sure we're looking at every expenditure.
I appreciate that, and understand that there are some unknowns there. Revisiting this at future board meetings as a specific line item, I might request from the chair and the vice chair to consider that with the superintendent, because this is should be a major point of concern for each of us going forward for the next several months.
And I agree. I can tell you that we have 2 sessions, and our next one will be talking about allocations, which is not necessarily that. But then our first look at the 2021-22 budget will be in January. And so that's the draft budget that I think we can have a real detailed discussion on it at that point as well. So coming up shortly, I think we'll have several discussions on it.
Thank you. That's early in January.
Yes, I believe so.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Other questions? I do not see any at this time. CFO Harden and to Dean Dorton, thank you for your work very much. And Dr. Polio, is there anything else that you would like to say as we wrap up this particular work session, sir?
Once again, I'd just like to thank everyone who's worked on this, from Dean Dorton to our staff to our MAC. It's been a real positive experience throughout this process. So thank you very much, and thank you to our board members for being a part of this as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Polio. Our next work session is the 2021 legislative agenda. Dr. Polio, if you would like to introduce that more, please.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Porter. And as you all know, we will have Abby Piper talk about this. We will be going in, the General Assembly will be beginning shortly after the holidays. So it's important that we bring you these legislative priorities for discussion. This is a first draft. We will take your feedback at that point, and then bring it back for your approval at the December board meeting. As an overview, I want to say, I think the most important thing we will be focusing on will be funding. We understand that the state could be facing a budget crisis, but we think definitely under the circumstances that education needs to be the one that is not negatively impacted. So we will be fighting hard to ensure that we get the funding, and this is really representing every school district in the state, that public education gets the funding it needs to support kids. So that will be a huge part of the push, especially that I'm involved in. And I want to be clear about this. As more emphasis begins to, or at least push begins to for scholarship tax credits or vouchers or any form of that, and including charter school funding, we will be very vocal in opposition to that. We can't be in a difficult budget, cut money to public school funding and then provide it to any type of voucher or scholarship tax credit. And me personally, I will be very vocal during this session to support public school funding and ensure that all dollars are sent to public schools to support the children of this Commonwealth and specifically this district. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Abby Piper so she can talk you through the priorities.
I almost committed the cardinal sin and forgot to unmute after all this time. Hi, good evening. I'm glad to be here. We do this annually, and it's always a really interesting exercise and sort of flexing where we want to be and where we need to focus our priorities and our advocacy work. And so, it's a good time of year to do it. I know that you all have been on screens all day, so let's just jump right in. We've designed your agenda a little differently this year. We're expanding our scope of issues because we need to. And in order to do that, we wanted to order them in topical sections so that we can review those multiple related positions at a single time and then collect that feedback at the end of each section. The only exception to that will be the first two sections, which is finance and pensions. Those two conversations are just so intertwined that we thought we should cover those together and then take feedback on those first two in tandem. So I want to draw your attention to three main pockets of finance asks here that would be new if approved by this body. The first is the establishment of long-term funding relief, and that will enable us to provide robust extended learning opportunities, things like summer learning and after-school programs and beyond that Dr. Polio has talked about. And we know that the impact on learning for COVID-19 has only begun, in part due to the trauma that they've experienced this year, in part due to adapted learning styles that we were forced to implement due to the virus. And so meeting kids where we are on this when it is safe to do so is not just critical, it is expensive. And we expect those costs to carry with us for a number of years. So that is the reason for this, this ask of state lawmakers to assist in that critical recovery effort. The second new item you'll see is a request to establish in statute a consistent rate of increase for SEEK. Now, every 2 years, we go to Frankfurt, along with our partners in crime, the School Administrators Associations, KEA and JCTA, and the school superintendents, and we ask for an increase to SEEK every 2 years. And many times in the past, we have gotten no increases, or we've gotten increases that, while we're grateful for them, frankly, do not even account for inflation. And so while current legislatures cannot bind future legislatures in terms of funding, this provision would set an expectation of increased and incremental funding over time. And that would assist districts in anticipating costs and planning beyond the moment, but it would also take some of the politics out of funding this critical budget item. So that is the reasoning for that addition. Third new addition is acknowledging that the state continues to shift this burden of funding schools to the local taxpayer. We would like to advocate for a single non-recallable nickel, and that would give districts across Kentucky a boost as they continue to have to make up for reduced funding as well. And a lot of this reduced funding we talk about has to do with state education programs and long-term cuts to education programs that have been made over several years or even decades. Those long-term impacts on school districts, they are cumulative, as we've discussed. And so this would be something that would help districts begin to catch up on some of that loss. Now, there are three things on here that will look familiar. The first is obviously the opposition for scholarship tax credits and charter school funding. We believe the first priority of all lawmakers should be to adequately fund public schools. And that is as required in the landmark 1989 case, Rose versus Council for Better Education. And you'll see that we have referenced that in this document. Over the years, programs for teacher recruitment and retention have been gutted. We've seen that happen time and again. Sometimes they get restored in part or parcel, and sometimes they are eliminated completely. We are advocating for these programs to be fully restored because now more than ever, we need qualified, passionate teachers who are willing to educate the world's next generation, and they need programs to support them. So I've listed those here as well. In that same vein, we need to be able to promise our teachers and to all of our support staff as well that their retirement contributions are safe. And lawmakers can do that by continuing to fully fund the actuarial required contributions. You'll see that referred to as the ARC. If they fund that ARC each year, that keeps our systems moving in the right direction. And the legislature did do that in the last session. We are urging them to continue doing that in future. We also believe this promise should include full funding for retiree health insurance with a focus on capping contribution rates for employers like school districts. Our rates are climbing higher every year. I'm sure Cordelia has told you many times about that. So what essentially we want to do is to make sure we do everything we can for the people that work for us and make sure that we provide the best services for kids. And with that, I will take any questions or feedback that you may have on this section.
If someone has a question, I need you to speak up because I can't see through the posting. But don't take it down, Abby. They can speak up. That's okay.
Ms. Porter, this is Chris Call. Can I ask a question?
Okay, Dr. Chris, please.
Thank you. So we had talked about the case in Arizona where they had a referendum, and imposed essentially a wealth tax at the state level to fund their public school systems. And of course, Kentucky doesn't have the ability to have a public referendum like that without some serious legal changes. But are there any other, I like the idea very much of a long-term increase to SEEK being codified. Are there any other ways that, we've thought about or talked about trying to, make sure that this is addressed on the state level? Because it's, as we've talked about many times in the revenue push, the 16% decrease since 2008 is very real, and the state revenues are not headed in a good direction overall. So lots of things are going to get cut, hopefully not education. So it's, we've been in the danger zone, but it's getting even worse for education funding. So is there any other leverage that we have or can exercise, or any options that we can float? Because to me, I really appreciate all the different sections we have here, but funding is the one that, it's clearly, to me, the biggest one that all the others hinge on. Any other details you can provide about that?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. What he's referencing, for those who are online watching, is Proposition 208 in Arizona that passed in the most recent election. Essentially, it creates a tax on people making more than $250,000 a year, or households making over $500,000 a year, and that new tax would go strictly to funding public schools. We are not a proposition state. We do have, the only recourse we have to take something to the ballot like that in an issue format is if it is a constitutional amendment. But we are thinking creatively about how we can work with lawmakers to restore a lot of this funding and to really be sincere about our commitments to funding education. A lot of conversations we've had with people on both sides of the aisle in the last 2 years have been encouraging to me. I will say that. I think one of the things that is most encouraging was to see that in the Senate's version of the budget last spring, they actually gave us record SEEK funding before, of course, the coronavirus caused them to have to pull that budget back and claw the funds back to current levels. I think that people are beginning to understand that if we don't fund public education adequately, we're going to have increased costs in our criminal justice system. We're going to have more people who need supports in our society. We're going to have more people who don't have good health care. We're going to have people making lower wages. And so all of this is starting to sort of swirl around, I think, across the country. But the most that we can do as a legislature, truly, and the most equitable way to really fund schools is to put that money into the SEEK formula. It is the most equitable way to do so. And frankly, is one of the larger single line items in Frankfurt.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Other comments? Okay, I think they're giving you permission to go to the next section, please.
Yes, ma'am. All right, so the next section is equity. And we've expanded our equity efforts this year, but I don't want to make the mistake of making it seem like we have just started on this journey, because that would not do justice to the folks in Dr. Marshall's shop who have helped us in this work throughout this process and have really dug in. And because of that work, we've developed an internal advocacy team this year, and that team will analyze bills of interest to education. They will perform a racial equity analysis on bills as we analyze them. And that will help us identify and propose legislation if there might be a disproportionate impact on minority students of a law that is on the table. So we're really excited to see how this impacts our advocacy efforts. I'm grateful for Dr. Marshall and his team for helping us put this together. And we look forward to showing you more of that in the future. But to that point, you'll see two items on this agenda in this category. First is the bill we worked on for the last 2 years. It's something we believe we can gain more traction on this year. and we are preparing leaders on both sides of the aisle for this policy proposition. The bill would increase minority representation on superintendent screening committees in districts that have a majority population of minority students, and that would include us. I would also add a student member to that committee, something that the board discussed last year and asked us to add as well. So we'll be working on that again this year, pending your approval. The second thing we've added this year is to propose advocating for increased requirements for culturally relevant curriculum in schools. And we really want to emphasize on curriculum outside of the Eurocentric perspective. We've done that because we know that students benefit from seeing themselves in their learning, and that the historic and inherent bias that is in many of the textbooks that have been used, or not even textbooks, but materials over time, have helped contribute to this rising disproportionality in student achievement. So we're advocating for that. We think it's an absolutely critical step for Kentucky. And so I will take any feedback on that section you may have, or I can move on to accountability at the will of the chair.
Abby, why don't you finish up the next two sections, and then we'll take questions at that point, if that's okay.
Yep, no problem.
Finish up the document.
Great. All right, so accountability, I want to be clear here. We are by no means asking to advocate for less transparency or accountability. Dr. Polio has said repeatedly that we must do better for all kids, and we're going to do whatever it takes to get there. So what we are asking for here is to allow districts to wrap around struggling students in schools, but not penalize them. So for that reason, we're urging the legislature to call upon the U.S. Department of Education for a waiver on the FY21 accountability test results only for the purposes of high stakes decision making. So that data would still be available, but it would allow us instead to use that data for intervention efforts and not for penalizing schools. Secondly, we are asking to advocate for a statutory change in Kentucky law, and that would maintain all levels of transparency that are currently there, but increase the sample size of students from 10 to 30 for the purposes of making high stakes decisions. We know that those decisions that put a school into CSI or TSI status or talk about leadership capacity, they can significantly disrupt school cultures and deplete morale when the work is really needed most. So that would increase that sample size without reducing any transparency or accountability. The next section is on board member burden. These two items work hand in hand. The first item would allow for appeals to demotions to be heard by the superintendent or his or her designee. And we believe this aligns with KRS 160.370 and 160.380 that give express powers for personnel matters to the superintendent. The same change could occur for appeals to students regarding placement in alternative school settings, which we've listed here. And in either case, these hearings can and would require multiple day-long hearings that would pull board members away from your jobs for days and days at a time. So that is the reasoning behind this section. And finally, in health, we could not be talking about health at a more critical time. You'll see that we've included a provision here regarding discouraging youth access to tobacco and alternative nicotine products, which we worked on last year for you and would like to ask for your support to continue pushing for. The second, you'll see an express ask for consideration of expanding mental health supports for students. And when we say expanding mental health supports, we mean state funding, specifically earmarked for this project. We know that despite this body's incredible efforts at increasing access to mental health for JCPS students, we're only scratching the surface and the need continues to grow. We don't have to belabor that point. I know you are all too familiar with it. So if the legislature were to set aside funds specifically for mental health service providers, that would allow us to leverage even more federal match dollars through the free care waiver program. And that would help us deeply expand our services to students. So that is the reasoning for that. And I will finish up here by saying there's still a lot that we don't know about the upcoming session. We don't know if we will be able to advocate in person. We don't know what the budget forecast from the consensus forecasting group will look like in December. And we don't yet know the priorities of the two chambers. But these priorities have been drafted for you with students in mind, not politics. And so We are respectfully asking for your consideration of this document.
Thank you, Abby. I will entertain comments or questions at this time for the remainder of the items that she has mentioned on the back page: equity, accountability, reducing board member burden, and health. If there are any questions or comments about any of those items, would you please let me see your hand or speak up, please? Board Member Craig.
First, I think we should welcome Mr. Marshall and Pastor Scholl's daughters to the meeting. They're both wonderful, and it's great to see them.
It's about the kids.
Ms.
You know
Piper,
who the bosses really are, don't you?
yeah.
Did you know I'm 4 and I'm going to be 5?
I did not know that. It's good to hear that.
My birthday is December 20th.
Ooh, it's coming up.
Happy birthday coming up. We are well represented in Frankfurt, Ms. Piper, and I appreciate your efforts. I don't have really any specific comments on any of the items. We've all debated them, and I think there's broad consensus on everything here, and I appreciate your putting it together. I didn't have specific follow-ups on any individual item as you were going through them, simply because of my concern about the budget, concern about how COVID will impact the next session, and my general consensus, my general belief, and I hope it is the board's consensus, that I hope that the legislature is doing everything that it can possibly do to fight the virus so that we can get our kids back into school, and focusing spending priorities on COVID relief. And although these are all wonderful items and I agree with them, and I hope that you will fight for them vigorously, those are the two things that I hope the legislature focuses on. I hope it doesn't devolve into partisan bickering about whether or not COVID is real or not. And I'm discouraged by some of our leaders' efforts so far in the state, as Dr. Culp has referenced multiple times, with respect to a few local and statewide leaders that I would extend to other statewide leaders. That has to be the focus. I don't know how we get into how they can even get into a scholarship tax credit debate until they've exhausted every effort they can to fight the virus in the state of Kentucky so that we can get these kids back into school. So I want to emphasize those two items for you and for Dr. Polio and for the rest of the board members, and I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Okay, other questions or comments? Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I think the items here on the legislative priority list are really good. I really like the way most of these are worded. I do want to talk about at least 4 points here. First of all, within the diversity side of putting in the student rep on the screening committee, I really do appreciate that. I was wondering if we might be able to do something similar to that by allowing student rep to be part of the board. And of course, this would be, or at least leave it up to the board as to whether or not they would like to have a student rep. There's certainly a student rep from Eastern High School on KDE's board now. It's a non-voting member, but to be able to have that voice up there and hear a student voice, I think is really important, especially in a district of our size. We already have a superintendent's student committee or student council committee, basically, that maybe that representative can be pulled from. I know that there's been some resistance to that in the past, but I do think something that KDE can pull it off, we can certainly do it. But it's something to consider. There might solicit more discussion among board members, but it's just something I want to throw out there. Also, just as a point of past battle scars, if nothing else, we've taken off the list, and I understand why, where in last year, and we've had it on this list every year except 2017, in which time we had to have a special meeting just to say that it's still important to us. But that is, JCPS supports keeping the responsibility for student assignment to schools with local school boards and strongly opposes legislation that reduces or eliminates local control of student assignment. So obviously that was a battle in 2017 where we had left it off because we're trying to streamline our list. Legislators on the floor said, well, JCPS doesn't think that this is an issue anymore. And no, actually we do. So I don't know if that needs to be in there, or maybe a little asterisk at the bottom in small print saying, yeah, we still believe this. But just letting you know, I don't want to its board to have to come back for a special meeting just because of that. Last two, board member Craig earlier today on Twitter had talked about the fact that the city of Louisville is expanding their benefits for some of their employees for extended paid leave for paternal leave. And had made the comment we should take a look at that at JCPS, and I completely agree with that point. I've also made other points like that to try and enhance our benefits, because we're really not competing against other school districts for teachers. We're really competing against the private sector, and the private sector provides all sorts of benefits like this. However, in the past, I've been told that that is really an issue of the legislature. So I don't know if that would be something that we might, maybe not with this particular upcoming legislative agenda, but maybe in the future, think about that, of how maybe we would allow some school boards to have the flexibility to be able to enhance these benefits and provide, instead of having to divide sick days and days off, to have just flex days like you would have in the private sector, or expand paternal leave. So I'm just going to throw that out there. It's just something that we may want to think about. And the last item here is something that I appreciate, that under health, we had talked about legislation regarding tobacco and alternative nicotine products. However, it is not as strong as what we had last year. I think that Representative Jerry Miller had put out a bill that was talking about taxing and even banning possibly some flavors, not enough flavors, but at least some flavors from electronic cigarette products. I think that given had COVID not happened, that bill may have actually gotten farther than it did. But obviously, if a shortened legislative session with the pandemic, some things got pushed aside. That was one of them, unfortunately. I'd like to see us kind of have the same language we had last year and back into this. And that's also because we're also in the process of suing e-cigarette manufacturers. And I wouldn't want this board to be put in a position of opposing counsel if we're going to be in court saying, oh, well, your district actually lessened its legislative agenda in this item. So it might put us at a bad disadvantage. So the language we had before, and I'll just read it out, it would be, and I'm going to abbreviate this because we did get the purchasing age raised to 21. So that was part of what we had last year. That did go through. But what we had here modified, I'd like to see JCPS supports legislation that would discourage students from using tobacco products, alternative nicotine products, or vapor products, including legislation that taxes alternative nicotine products and vapor products and bans all flavors of vapor products. JCPS supports tax revenue generated from the sale of these products to fund community education and prevention programming aimed at educating minors and their families of the danger of use by minors of all tobacco products, and education of families for identification of devices used and treatment options available. I thought that was really good wording, Abby, that Ms. Piper, that you put in last time. I still would like to see something like that this time around. And with that, I conclude my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brady. I have a couple of questions. It just came up about having a student on the screening committee, and that's fine. But if the board chose to have a student sit in on the board meetings, that's a local decision versus a Frankfurt decision. Am I correct about that?
I'm going to defer to Kevin on that one.
If the board chose to have a student sit in our meetings and be a non-voting member, but to have the student voice on the current board, is that a Frankfurt decision, or is that a Jefferson County board decision? And I ask that question because there is a student that has been on the board for some time at Fayette County. So I'm trying to understand, where does that permission come from?
Or it may be just, it depends on how the student is characterized on the board. If the student were to be an official ex officio member, that would take statutory change. But, and I can talk frequently with Fayette County's general counsel, actually just talked with her today, and see how they're doing it. But the board, of course, could invite a student to be present at meetings and recognize that student as being an advisor. And, you know, we could work out details as to whether or not that student would participate in closed sessions and that type of thing with sensitive information. But I think we could achieve the objective without a statutory change, but a statutory change would obviously be more permanent and maybe provide a few more guidelines on how that would operate.
Okay, thank you. I think it's a discussion for the board to have whether they would even want to consider that. I know that it is happening with not only in Kentucky but in other boards across the nation. So I'm not saying that we're doing that. I'm saying that I would like to have a conversation about us doing that for just to have the student voice at the table, but not for the closed sessions and things like that. So that's just a question. And the one, Ms. Abby, where it talks about reducing the board member burden, I love the language of that, where we talk about making the decision-making put on the superintendent or his or her designee. So would that decision be made by one person or more than one person? And I ask that because I'm not sure on other things where folks come to the district for a hearing. Do they typically sit with one person or do they sit with 2 or 3 persons? That's just a question that I do not know the answer to.
I believe that they sit with more than one person, but I'll let Kevin jump in.
And that depends on the type of hearing. The teacher tribunal hearing, of course, it's the membership of the tribunal, the 3 tribunal members. The motion hearings are obviously the members of the Board of Education. They're throughout the statutory scheme and various appeal mechanisms. There are various different ways to handle that.
Okay, I just would like some clarity on that because invariably somebody will say that whoever they sit before, if it's one person, that person didn't like me. And we don't have time for that. So I just would like to know if we need to broaden that. I appreciate the fact, and our general counsel understands how hard it is to get the board members together when we have to have those hearings. So I appreciate this being put on the legislative agenda. So thank you so much.
And Madam Chair, that's also, it's somewhat of a conflict because we have so many prohibitions that you all know well because of your training about personnel. But then when it comes to demotions, you all are charged with a demotion hearing. And so that's always something that is tricky to explain to a new board member as to why that is, even though we don't have many of those. And we would have to probably work out with, if there was a sponsor for this legislation, about how that would work on the ground, because employment decisions are made by the superintendent. And so that if there is a designee, it would certainly have to be a group of others or a person that was separated from the initial employment demotion decision at the very beginning, as you point out.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Abby, for your work. I think it reads very well. So thank you for the time that you put in it. I don't see that there are any other questions or comments. So thank you. And I'll give it back to Dr. Polio to bring us to closure on this. But thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Piper. We appreciate that. And I know she'll be working hard on for the next 5 months on all of those priorities. So have fun with that. But thank you all for your feedback. We'll bring it back to you next time with a final version.
Thank you. So that takes care of the 2 work sessions for this evening. We're going to move on now to the consent calendar. And after the consent calendar, I want to be clear that I will not allow myself to forget the fact that we have some tie bids tonight. So there have been no items pulled down from the consent calendar prior to the meeting. So at this time, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar at this time?
Craig moved.
Second, Brady.
Craig and Brady. Okay, thank you so much. I will call for the vote at this time, and I'm going to start at the top of the list.
Porter, could you pause a second? We lost the stream. I'll need for Kevin to let us know about if we can proceed or do we have to hold until we get the stream back up.
Okay, that's fine.
I apologize.
No problem.
We're going to need to hold.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I will let you know as soon as they got it back up.
No problem.
So no motions in the meantime, Kevin, is that right?
That's correct.
No votes, no discussion.
We are back, Ms. Porter. Good to go.
Okay, thank you so much. Would like to acknowledge the fact that we had a break in the streaming of our meeting, and so we are now back for the streaming so everyone can be aware of the meeting moving forward. At this time, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Is there a motion, please?
Craig moves.
Thank you. And a second by?
Chris Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. I will call for the vote starting at the top. Dr. Chris?
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Thank you. Diane Porter? Yes, it's unanimous. Thank you very much. So at this time, I will turn it over to the Vice Chair, Dr. Chris Cobb, because we have 3 bid items tonight. Dr. Chris.
Thank you. I've got 6 envelopes here, so get comfortable, everyone. Item number 26 on bid ID 7893 for controls for heating and AC, and the item is awarded to SWH Supply Company, Inc.
Thank you.
Item number 214 on bid ID 7899 for electrical supplies and lighting line item, and the item is awarded to Richards Electric.
Thank you.
Item number 269 on bid ID 7899 for electrical supplies and lighting line item, and the item is awarded to Richards Electric.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Item number 7 on bid ID 7903 for bus body parts and accessories, and the item is awarded to Central States Bus Sales Incorporated. Item number 78 on bid ID 7903 for bus body parts and accessories, and the item is awarded to UHL Truck Sales. And the last one, items number 22 and 157 on bid ID 7903 for bus body parts and accessories, and the items are awarded to American Bus and Accessories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cobb. That takes care of all the tab bids for this evening. And at this time, whatever the time is, before I ask for the adjournment, I would like to thank everyone that reported to us tonight, the hard work for the evening. It was a lot. The financial report was amazing, and the work of everyone to put this together for us. And it's great to see everyone this evening. And according to my phone, it says it's 8:15 p.m. So at this time, is there a motion to adjourn, please?
Marshall.
Board Member Marshall, seconded by?
Brady.
I'm sorry, who?
Brady.
Okay, thank you, sir. Calling for the vote to adjourn, starting with Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board Member Brady.
Yes.
Thank you. And Diane Porter, yes. Thank you, everyone. Congratulations to our newly elected or second-term board members, and please continue to be safe, and please wear your mask, and think of not only your safety, but the safety of others. Thank you, everyone, for your hard work. We are officially adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Stay
Good night,
safe.
everybody.